Okay, I'm going to start out with a statement before I bring Dave on. We're going to talk to Dave, and this is not the best way to start any kind of a podcast episode by saying the subject matter of this is going to suck, because it is. You know, we had the fires in L.A., and it's been really horrible. I don't know about you, but I've been kind of glued to it. It's kind of hard not to watch because it's just so tragic. Not that I love tragedy, but it's just shocking and tragic and terrible, and like that, all these folks losing their homes, and then people looting and people starting fires. I mean, good night, how horrible is that? And all the folks who have lost everything, rich, poor, doesn't matter. People have lost everything. Terrible, terrible tragedy. And we're going to talk about that. Now, here's what we're going to talk about, what we're not going to talk about, okay? We're not going to get into the political weeds about why this happened and who shoulda, woulda, coulda. There's a lot of that going on, and I get it. And if you want to know my opinion on that, you can go watch X and watch it there. What we are going to do is talk about being ready for this the next time, and not from the standpoint of being a prepper to the nth degree or whatever. We're just going to chat about it because he and I have taught about this stuff in class a lot, and I've talked about it in previous videos. We've talked about it in previous episodes. But there are simple things that people can do that they might not think of, and Dave might think of them, or I might think of them. As you know, Dave Weiner is my buddy. We've been friends forever. He's a retired police chief. He was a police officer for, 25 years or more. I'll have to ask him. We'll find out. And he owns Secure Measures, and he does a lot of training for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, as well as a whole bunch of other police departments. He's more on the public safety end as far as police are concerned. I do a lot of security training, so I'm more on the security contractor end and security consultant end, although he does some of that work too. So we figured we'd get put our heads together and see if we could help you be a tad more prepared for this stuff than maybe you already are, without at the same time making it seem impossible or daunting or super expensive or whatever. So with that lead in, if you want to call it that, let's go talk to Dave. Dave, it's been a kind of a crazy few days here. I mean, you're up in Elsinore, so you're not in LA, but I know you got family in LA, and we both have friends up in that area and all like that. The place has been burning down. I mean, it's been kind of crazy. So I'm glad you called. So I wish I could take the credit for this and say that it was my idea to talk about being ready for these things. But you called me yesterday and said, "Hey, we got to talk about this." So there you are.
I think that, I mean, these are conversations we've had in the past, right? We've done stuff
with students, actually.
Yeah. And, unfortunately, first and foremost, my heart really goes out to people that have lost their homes. They've lost family members. It's an absolute tragedy. Our first responders who are already overworked and constrained heavily, especially in LA. They're working overtime, and I know for a fact, as I do a lot of teaching for the sheriff's department. They're actually looking at canceling some trainings and some other things because they're pulling from every part of the department to staff, help with the fires, to support the patrol stations and other things. And what this really kind of highlighted for me in particular, you and I, are I would argue fairly prepared for stuff, right? We've kind of lived a lot of these things, but what this really highlighted for me is it can happen anywhere. And these are the kind of things that we wish wouldn't happen, but hope isn't a plan.
Yeah, right. I mean, you don't think it's going to happen in the burbs, right?
Well, no.
People live in the burbs, they go, that's can't happen to me. Well,
yeah.
The Palisades are a burb.
Yeah.
Santa Monica is a burb, right?
Well,
Altadena is a burb. This is all...
100%.
These are all suburban areas, and you don't think that the suburban areas are going to come crashing down on you. It's interesting. To the degree of not being prepared, we could say to somebody, okay, well, you got to have your go bag, and you got to have it ready, and you got to be up by the door, and you got to have your car ready, and you got to have. And truth is, most people aren't going to do that. But I mean, even to the degree that I saw one person, I forget who, indicated that they just grabbed, I saw this on X, posted, I grabbed the laundry basket with the laundry on the way out the door. So they just weren't prepared to have any clothes with them or whatever. One individual said that they had trouble, couldn't get out of the house. I saw a post on that. Couldn't get out of the house because the power had gone out and the garage door opener didn't open. So they just didn't know that if you walk over and pull that handle on the garage door opener, it releases the connection and you can just push the garage door opener up or roll it up or whatever. They didn't even know the basics of how to get their car out. Yeah. Or the number of folks who either didn't charge their Tesla or didn't gas up their vehicle or whatever, came home and had 1/8 of a tank of gas or less, and then the car ran out of gas or ran out of power leaving, and they just left the car there in the middle of the road. And of course, if you leave cars in the middle of the road, you block the road, the next person that gets there can't get their car through, and so this stacking up of cars begins because somebody's car either failed or they ran out of fuel or whatever, and they just left it in the middle of the road. And then, you could see the scenes of the bulldozers in there literally shoving the cars out of the way so that firefighters could get through and fight the fire. This is even that level of preparedness on the part of a lot of folks would have helped. When you're on your way home and you realize you're on half a tank, stop and fill your car up. Work off the top of the tank rather than the bottom. It took 25 years for me to get my wife to finally work off the top of the tank rather than working on the last 1/8 of the tank all the time. Then she'd go to the gas station and put $10 in it. I'm like, what? Back when $10 meant something. I said, you're at the gas station. Why don't you just fill it up? Well, I don't have time, and so I just put $10 in it. That mentality is what gets you stuck when you're trying to leave in a big hurry. So even those little things like that, I was kind of astounded by. Anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I don't know if you saw reports like that too. But this is really elementary stuff. This is not deep, dark prepper, stuff.
Well, what a lot of this has made me do in particular is really kind of look at my planning, right? Because when you have a situation like this, sometimes you think, oh, I'm prepared. And, being out where we are in the Inland Empire, we had major fires out here in 2018. It rained ash down on the house. And at that point we're prepared to evacuate. We never got the order to do so. But when the fire was growing and growing and growing and we were paying attention to it, and because it was relatively close, made me kind of reflect, like, what are some of the things that, I'm doing right now? Because, unfortunately, the other thing that was on the news is you also have some folks out there who are arsonists that are also now going out and starting additional fires. Which is really, really putting an even bigger strain, which means, we're unfortunately where we live is a high fire area. So knowing that, I've done little things, like we know we're going to be subject to the power company public safety power shutoffs. So do I have critical systems on UPSs, in the house? Cameras, alarms, internet, refrigerators, things like that. Buying a UPS, plugging everything into that, you're going to get a little distance out of that.
No, okay, so I've got them. Like this computer system and the router and the television, all that kind of stuff is all connected to them. But why don't you explain what a UPS is so that people don't think you're buying a UPS truck because it's driving up to your house and plug your stuff into it?
A universal power supply, and basically what that is it's basically a battery bank. It's basically a battery that could last 2-3 hours, can buy some time, depending on how long the power is shut off, but allows you to safely shut down equipment. When the power goes out, there's a switch inside the battery box that immediately switches over to battery power. And just having a couple of those around the house plugged into critical things like the fridge and stuff like that. Because if you're in an area where there is a shut off, and I always kind of, when we think in terms of emergencies, we think wildfires, earthquakes, and stuff like that. But power outages are far more common. And a lot of people never, don't ever think, well, and in some cases the power goes off for a few minutes, and sometimes it could be off for hours. I think mindset is important. I think just in general, I think sometimes, and I'll speak for myself. I think sometimes, you take for granted, oh, well, I live in the suburbs. We're good. We have a fire department, police department. We're good. Things will get taken care of. But, the reality of being a former first responder is that I know
Yeah.
for sure
Yeah.
that during a major disaster of any kind, whether it's a hurricane, a fire, earthquake, they're not coming. And my mindset is if it can happen, it will, or potentially will, right? Because if it has the ability to happen, just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't necessarily mean it never will.
You have to be your own 911, don't you? Because
For the most part, and the reality too is I know plenty of people who actually had plans in place for this kind of stuff, but they're very loose plans, right? Like, hey, if there's a fire, I already know that I'm gonna go, where are you planning to go? And it doesn't have to be a hard and fast plan. As I shared, we had those big fires in 2018. If
yeah,
I needed to evacuate, I would have headed up to LA to where my parents are. And that's a very loose plan, but it's still a plan. It doesn't have to be overly complicated, just like you were pointing out. It's actually very simplistic in terms of think about where you might want to go or where you could go if something happens in your area.
well, I
That's
think the other part
very,
of
very
that is
simple.
understand that the things we depend upon every day might not be present when you're trying to evac. For example, if the cell towers get burned down,
Yep.
you might not have cell coverage.
Yep.
You might, and if you perhaps you might not have your GPS. If you're like
Mm-hmm.
me, I drive an older pickup. Now you get in
Mm-hmm.
my wife's car; it's got its own GPS. It's got more bells and
Yeah.
whistles. It's got buttons. I don't even know what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And that thing drives itself, literally, almost.
Of course.
My truck, it's a 2002 Ford F-350. You get in it, you got to turn the key to start it, and so my phone goes in the little thing, and that's what I use for GPS or whatever. So if that's not working, I may know how to get where I'm going, but do I know all the alternate routes in case that route is not available to me? And if I don't know those, and I'm just going to confess that I don't, then I might want to have some sort of a hard map in the vehicle.
Yeah.
Every year, Thomas Brothers maps are still out particularly for LA County, Orange County, San Diego County, Imperial County, and here in California. And so every year I just order new ones on Amazon or whatever, and they'll go in a case, and they go in the trunk,
Mm-hmm.
or in the case of my wife's, in the truck, they go behind the seat. My wife's SUV, they go in the back, and they're there. We know how to use them. So if we can't figure it out, then we can go back to the paper version of how to get from here to there, because oftentimes you find that you can't, people have blocked the way, or a tree has fallen, or there's fire on, and you can't do it, or whatever, and you got to find a different avenue to get where you're going. And if you're not prepared because you're so dependent upon today's electronics, you're in deep trouble. You're lost. This is all, it's like I said, it's small stuff, right?
Yeah.
But it's stuff that you can put in place. I think the thing that I was marveling at is that so many folks saw it coming and didn't take steps to get out of the way. I mean, or to get out before it got there. I mean, I saw several people on X say, well, I'm all packed up to go, but I don't really want to go yet. My the house across the street is on fire, but I don't really want to go yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? I don't know, brother. If the house across the street is on fire and all the houses around you are on fire, you probably should have gone a while ago. No?
Yeah. If, first and foremost, for at least for me, I pay attention to those evac or, warnings, orders, whatever. I pay attention to those because that is letting me know that either the situation is getting better or it's getting worse, depending on the situation. And that's how you can really gauge the situation. Now, obviously, those alerts are important, but the challenge becomes is some of those systems are still operated by people. And I was watching a press conference before we hopped on this morning, because they accidentally sent out some alerts last night that weren't necessary. And some people were getting them in San Bernardino. Like
Really? Oh, wow.
yeah, oh yeah, it was a big deal. And what happens at that point is, I say I pay attention to the alerts. I have a lot of other, feeds and news, sources that I can look at, but a lot of people depend on those emergency alerts. And what happens is if you get a false alert, you're starting to panic people. And if you're getting too many alerts, then people get alert fatigue. And then eventually they just shut it off.
Yeah, it's like the
Or
whole
they,
boy that cried wolf thing, right?
yeah, yeah, and that has the exact opposite effect. Instead of educating people now, and people were very, very upset, and they were really asking tough questions at this press conference,
Yeah,
about
imagine.
that, because that was a big deal, and I get that. I mean, that's an important part of the process, but all of this just was a very, very stark reminder for me in particular, that the need to just have a general plan of what I'm going to do during X, Y, and Z, is going to be ever present. We live in wildfire and earthquake country, so those are our real big hazards here in California. So those are the two things that, I have very generalized plans for, to do whatever I need to do, whether it's to evac. Sometimes if it's bad enough, I have places to go out of state. Like
Yeah.
if things got so bad here from an earthquake perspective, I'll use that as
See
an
it. See it.
example.
My place in Arizona, brother. We'll be out there. Right. Yeah.
Well, to see, you didn't know that, but it was your place. So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
kind of did.
So,
That's okay.
you know,
We'll go by and see Scott on the way.
a
All
hundred
right.
percent, 100%.
Yeah, I mean,
But
it's just look. I've lived through in 1970. I was a kid, obviously. I was born in '58, so I was a kid, and we lived in Harbison Canyon, which is east East County, kind of out in the sticks. And it was nothing but a lot of farms out there like that. And then above that was Crest, and Crest was, the pot smoking hippie crowd or whatever, if you wanted to call them that back then. They were a boatload of fun, but that's where they lived. Okay. And the Laguna Fire, which was also called the Kitchen Creek Fire and other things, went ripping through there. And I remember, for whatever reason, my family decided to stay and save the house, which in retrospect was not the most bueno idea. Somehow we survived, but literally I watched a fire go ripping by the house. It wasn't there, and then it was there. I mean, it's just the speed with which brush fires move is stunning. And pretty much most of the houses in the area, well, not most, but I'd say at least 50% were gone. And ours survived, but it was pretty bad, and the smoke was really bad, and so on. And then fast forward to 2003, I think we had the Cedar Fire, which was exponentially larger. And of course, we're living where we live now, and we're in the burbs. We're not out in the country anymore, and we're in East County. And I thought, it's not going to get to us. But nevertheless, I said to Deanne, let's get the RV ready. And so we got the truck because we have a big travel trailer. We hooked it up to the back of the truck, got the truck gassed up, got it hooked up, pulled it out in the front, threw the generator on the back, got all of our stuff inside, got all geared up, ready to go, and knew if we needed to pop smoke, we're out. And then at that point, I could volunteer to help with the Red Cross. We went down and helped the firefighters down at Gillespie Field and brought them a bunch of stuff. We did all the things we needed to do because at that point we were ready. We were ready to go if we needed to go. Well, it never got within our vicinity, but from our house, I could see it burning on the hills a mile from here. Mm-hmm. And that distance from a mile to here is not that far once the fire starts engaging homes in a suburban area, because the fire will keep going as long as there's fuel and houses are fuel. And we wanted to be on the road before the panicked exit, because if you wait until the panicked exit, now you can't get out because the roads are so full. So that didn't mean we were ready to go immediately, but we got ready to go when we saw the fire was at that point pretty much out of control. And here's my point. You mentioned earthquakes. We got earthquakes, but you don't see them coming. We know they're coming, but we don't know when. We don't know where.
Sure.
We don't know how bad the earth is going to shake. You don't tornadoes. You got tornado season, and you can kind of see it coming, but I mean they come up pretty fast. Hurricanes you can see from a long way away. Every area you go has natural disasters. You can see a hurricane coming. You know it's coming for days before it comes. Wildfires are those are all natural phenomenon, hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquakes and like that. Fires in California are not natural phenomenon. They are completely and utterly preventable. And we could prevent them. We don't. And we could get into all the political stuff about that. I'm not going to. But the point is that unless it happens in your yard, on your property, and starts there, you see it coming. It's coming. Mm-hmm. And yet we don't. The folks in Florida see the hurricane coming and they board up the windows and they get, right?
Yeah.
And we don't do that out here. Why do you suppose that is? I mean, why is that?
I think it just goes back to what you were sharing earlier, which is mindset, right? I think, to your point, with earthquakes, you don't really see them coming, but with wildfires, I think it just goes back to, regardless of whether we can see them or not, we know that they happen because they've happened in the past. And in some cases, like the Northridge earthquake is an example, that was pretty devastating and damaged a lot of structures and caused a lot of problems. And that part of that went to a lot of the retrofitting and some of the other things you saw, buildings and whatnot. But, I think it's really just understanding that, understanding local hazards. I know what our local hazards out here are in Riverside. So I'm generally prepared for those hazards. The reality is you can't prepare for every single instance. That's not realistic. Yeah. But just understanding the hazards that are presented and just know that they can happen. It doesn't mean they will, but these things can happen. And unfortunately, and we see this with other kinds of events, and we've seen this around the country where, they'll interview people on the news and they're like, oh, I never thought that would happen here. Well, the point is that anything can happen anywhere, and having a mindset of if it could happen, it might. And so taking steps to address, and like I said, I know plenty of people during this fire that had a plan and executed it, and they were able to get out and do things. Unfortunately, I also know of some friends and colleagues who've lost their homes, which is, absolutely devastating. And in those cases, I would tell people, come here, stay here. If you need a place to stay, I got you.
Yeah. Well, and sadly, some folks lost their lives. I mean, we have I think the other day, five people or something, 5 or 6 people died there.
It's
tragic.
What a
what a tragic and horrible thing to have happen. I mean, I can't even imagine the terror of being stuck
Yeah.
and surrounded by fire. I mean, I saw a little bit of video of these two guys and their dog who were everywhere they looked outside their house was surrounded by these incredible flames. And my understanding is that they did manage to get out, but man, horrifying, because all of a sudden you realize there's nowhere to go, and then some folks didn't get out. It's scary stuff. It's interesting as you mentioned Northridge, because I think, I mean, I don't know about you, but I kind of learn from people who will say, oh yeah, this happened to me, right? And I go, oh crap, okay, well, I'm not ready for that at all. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so I'm in the classroom, right? And I'm teaching a class, and then one student, we're talking about this now. I don't know what we're talking about. I forget. But it's like a, break. I send the students on a break, and we're shooting a breeze about X, Y, and Z. And somehow emergency preparedness probably came up or what. I don't remember. But in any case, he starts talking about the fact that he was in the Northridge earthquake. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And I said, man, I'm glad you survived. He said, yeah, he was in his office, I guess, or what have you. And he's in a high rise like we've got over there, right? He's in a high rise, and the building sort of shifted. Well, the door jamb shifted, and he couldn't get out because the door jamb. So now he's stuck in this office he can't get out of until firefighters came and breached the door to get him out. I went home and I thought, golly, that would suck. Can you imagine that? So you're in this building now, and now you're there for how long? You're in an earthquake like that? It could take days for them to get you. And I thought, no, I got to be able to get out. Well, those doors, I mean, the doors are pretty heavy, but the walls are just sheetrock and steel studs in an office building like that. So I'm like, okay, wait a minute, hold up. I have my go everywhere, every day bag. My wife says to me, if I forget it and I go out and I go to get my truck, she says, you can't call it a go everywhere bag unless it goes everywhere. And I go, yeah, you're right. And I go back and get it. And so this is now in my go everywhere bag.
Yeah.
Because I have it anyway, because I use it hunting. This sucker is my breaching tool to get me the heck out of the building to cut through the wall on the odd chance that I might be in that building during an earthquake and the building shifts enough that I can't open the door. And it's all because of that student. I mean, it's like the stupid things that you learn from other people. He said it was terrifying. He's stuck in this building. And of course, then, you get the shake, right?
Yeah.
And now you're stuck in a building you can't get out, and it shakes again, and you realize that building comes down.
Well,
I
was my parents were still down here. I was actually, still serving in the Air Force when that happened. And when I tried calling home to check on my parents, all the phones were down. So it took it took a good couple days to actually get through. And then obviously I went to my command and said, hey, I need to get home. So they granted me emergency leave to go down to SoCal, and I remember, I think my dad said, like, the inner roof of our garage at the time, we lived in a different place. The inner roof of the garage collapsed. A lot of things got knocked off the walls, and there was a lot of structural cracks and other things in the house. Like, it was, and they didn't, they're probably about 8 miles from Northridge, or 8 miles from the epicenter. So they got a good shaking. They actually had to go help a neighbor get out of her house because she had a bunch of things fall over in her hallway, and she was elderly. So it was pretty traumatic, I think, for my folks. But it's one of those things where, after that, my parents have, they have an emergency kit and other things, and I've gotten them up to speed, and I also know what to do, with them if I needed to evacuate them. My parents are elderly, so I know, I have a general plan about how how that operation is gonna go. If it becomes necessary, but it's terribly tragic to see. But for me, like I said, this was more of kind of like, wow, I need to really take a hard look at my stuff, and figure out, do I have good plans in place? Not for every eventuality, but mostly for earthquakes, wildfires, that kind of stuff. And because we're in wildfire country out here, so I
Yeah.
know if it's happening in the middle of Los Angeles, it can certainly
Certainly happen where
happen
you are. Yeah.
happen here. And I think I was sharing with you too that about 5 or 6 miles away from my parents, there was a fire that broke out, I think, on Wednesday morning in the Sepulveda Basin.
Yeah.
And that quickly spread, jumped Burbank Boulevard,
Right.
and wasn't overtly far from my folks, but that could have easily gotten out of control. And there's tons of homes and apartments and other things.
Well, we've talked about a whole bunch of stuff. I mentioned my breaching tool, which is pretty much over the top. Nobody's going to bring a big knife like that to work all the time. I get it. I'll show you another over the top thing. Okay. This, and I don't think these are. I think these are going to be less necessary going forward. I know that
Hmm.
Starlink is got to deal with what is it, T-Mobile or something, where you can make a phone call now
Hmm.
or text through your with your cell phone, and you don't need a
Hmm.
special hookup or whatever. If you have a T-Mobile phone,
Sure.
you can send texts through Starlink, and
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that the other services will find a way to do that because they're
Yeah.
when you got competitors doing something like that, you got to figure it out. So if you got Verizon or whatever. Prior to that, we had a big. I spent a number of years ago. We had a big power outage in the Southwest because some guy
Hmm.
killed a transformer in Nevada or some stupid thing.
Hmm.
And in the process, it shut us all down for a day. And they were all talking about, gee, this could last 2, 3 days or whatever. Nobody had power. Even the police station, local police station, didn't have any power. They were building I think they were building a new cop shop at the time, and the old one didn't have any
Hmm.
emergency power. Go figure. And my son, who, as you know, has grown and has his own
Hmm.
family, his own children, whatever, at this point, he was going to college. So I go to pick him up because I had dropped him off at school that morning. I don't know what was going on with his car, but I dropped him off. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll go get him. Well, the cell phone towers are down. There's no comms anywhere. You can't reach anybody. So I go on the campus. I'm looking for this kid. And, he's easy to spot because he's a big boy, but it's a big campus.
Hmm.
And most of the cars are gone. People have gone home. So I'm looking for him. So I stop a campus cop and I go, hey, have you seen, he's on the basketball team. Have you seen this kid? He's a big guy and like that. And he said, well, no. Well, can you call around and see? Well, I could, except our comms are down.
Ooh.
So I'm talking to the campus cops, got no comms.
Hmm.
And I thought, this is absurd. Well, for years I've had this thing because I
Yeah.
hunt. When I hike, I'm out in the middle of nowhere, and I pay for the service because
Hmm.
this will get on the Iridium network, and I can send my wife a
Hmm.
text, and I can put breadcrumbs together to let her know, here is where I am, and it drop a breadcrumb every 10 minutes or whatever. And if I need help, I pay for the emergency help. I can open up the little SOS button. I
Hmm.
can hit the button, and they'll come get me. And I thought, well, I need to get one of these for my wife so that if this happens, if you and I, for example, are up in Orange County or we're in LA County or we're someplace doing
Hmm.
something,
Hmm.
and all hell breaks loose, we can get a hotel, whatever. And if the cell towers are down, I can at least text my wife and say, Dave and I are okay. We're over here. We're
Yeah.
hunkering down. We're good. We had dinner. We're going to wait till it's all, whatever. And so I got her a different one. Well, this is an older version. It's pretty big. They got a little one now
Hmm.
called a mini. So
Yeah.
she's got that one. So she takes that's connected to her purse. She takes that thing everywhere. This goes everywhere with me
Yeah.
so that we have some basic communications. Nowadays, I think this is going to be less an issue when you get into things like Starlink and like that. But having some way to communicate and making the assumption that the cell towers are going to go down
Yeah,
is probably a good thing.
ironically, back in November, I was out hiking. In November, I was out hiking with a buddy of mine. And, we were in a place where there was absolutely no cell service, but all the new Apple phones, at least the 15s and above, have satellite
Yeah,
service.
yeah, they do.
So I was still able to get text messages and other things, and it actually works pretty well. You just line your phone up with wherever the satellite is in the sky, and it connects you. So, that is a great feature, to have. And I love the fact that Starlink is hooked up with T-Mobile and making it a little bit more. easier for folks to communicate during emergencies.
Well, particularly if
I
they don't
think
have an
that's
iPhone.
wonderful.
If you're
Yeah, hundred
rocking some
percent.
sort of an
Yeah,
Android, right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, I just, it's terrible to see what's happening. Hopefully, with all the mutual aid and everything that's coming from other states, they get this thing under control pretty quick.
Well,
And
if we were to just come up with a quick basic list of things people ought to just get in the habit of doing. I
sure.
mean, even just a rough sort of. I mean, first, I think, wouldn't you agree that we should advise people to have a detailed written plan and go back and revisit it regularly and all those other things?
That's not realistic.
I don't think they
And
will.
and
Right.
I think if I was going to have a basic list of things, or suggestions, I think the first one is have just a generalized plan. Number one, evacuation. Where are you going to go? If there's a fire, an earthquake, wherever, what are some general places you think you might be able to go? Start, identifying. Like if you have family 5 towns over, maybe that's where you're going to go, right? You
Right.
want to talk with them about that, but of course, you know, figure those things out. I think everybody gets to your point. I think everybody gets a little overwhelmed with the thought process around preparedness, and they have to get prepper level,
Yeah, which I
which
don't think is
you
true, is it?
you could no. I mean, if you don't have a suitcase, or if you don't have, hey, get a garbage bag. And I know this is very,
Right.
very, very generic, but get a garbage bag, fill it with, some older clothes, maybe that you're not using, or maybe you thought about donating at one point. Hey, put those in there, wrap them up, put, some duct tape, and write, evac clothes, or whatever on it. These, what I'm suggesting is being very simplistic in terms of, where you're going to go. One of the things that I would tell people is, make copies of documents and maybe store them elsewhere, right? If you have the ability, store them in the cloud, right? That way you can access them anytime, any place. If that's not feasible, maybe scan them to like maybe a portable hard drive that you keep somewhere else, or something that you can quickly grab and roll out. Um, Obviously little things around your house like a fire extinguisher, right?
Yeah.
Know how to use it. Um, having, like we talked about, some of those universal power supplies and other things to keep critical systems online, just for communication purposes. I have several spare batteries for
Yeah.
my
Those
phone,
are big. Right. Those are a big deal.
that, I mean, those aren't super expensive, and I know some people are financially strapped, which is understandable, but, build, start today, and start, those that haven't been impacted, start today. Just having a mindset, and then most importantly, out of all that, having a mindset of, hey, a lot, because what's going to happen is a lot of those things that we're sharing, or at least we're talking about right now, let you build resilience into your
Mm.
life, that you're able to, handle and recover potentially, and obviously there's a ton of resources out there. There's, if you go to FEMA, if you go to ready.gov, there's a ton of lists and checklists and all kinds of things that you can look at also to help you be or feel a little bit more prepared. But it doesn't have to be this huge prepper level type of preparedness. It's just general stuff. Like, hey, if something happens in my neighborhood, where can I go outside my neighborhood? And if something happens in my city, where can I go outside my city? And if something happens outside my city, and if it's that big, well, where else can I go? What are some things
Yeah,
I can do?
and some folks have places to go. I mean, I have a
Yeah.
place to go, and some folks do, and some
Yep.
folks don't, and but I think if we have family and we have friends, we have a place to go, and maybe that's a conversation that should happen before rather than later. In the
Yeah.
short term, if you can, and again, this gets back to finances. I realize, if you can, keep some actual cash in your wallet, right?
Yeah.
Or if you can't and you just need to save it up, In my truck, I have a pistol safe behind the
Hmm.
seat that's actually attached to the truck because sometimes, yesterday I went to the chiropractor. Well, he doesn't want guns in his chiropractic office, so I
Hmm.
locked the gun I was carrying in the pistol safe, and then went and parked the truck so nobody saw me do that where I parked. So I have the pistol safe for that reason, because that way the weapon is secured in the safe, and I carry a gun every day just like you do. But in that safe I also keep money. I keep cash, in 20s and 10s and like that. I don't always succeed. I try to keep about $500 in there, and here's why. Because if the power goes out, where are you going to use a credit card? And what you'll find is some gas stations may have the ability to pump fuel because they might have an emergency,
Hmm.
generator to do that. But that doesn't mean that their ability to take credit cards is going to be intact. And so you might have to pay cash for the gas that you're getting. You might stop to grab a motel because you might be out of town, and or you might be someplace where your house is burning down and you might need to get a place to stay
Yeah.
for the night, and maybe they can't take credit cards. If you got some cash that you've set aside specifically for that kind of stuff, that'll get you through the night. And then the next day you can sort out, I'm going to my Uncle Fred's house or my buddy's house or whatever, and you can get out. It's small stuff, but then you
Yep.
got to be disciplined. Once you put that away, you got to put it away in a place where it's out of sight, out of mind, because if you're not, then you're going to end up using it because you got this or that or the other thing. And then sure enough, emergency is going to come and you're not going to have that cash. I think getting in the habit, again, it's a financial issue, but getting in the habit, if you can, of keeping at least your tank in your car half full.
Yep.
Work off the top of the tank instead of working off the bottom. If you can invest enough to get it full the first time, then when you get to a half a tank, you can put some more gas in it each time. Even if you can only put $20 in it, you can put gas in it each time. If you can
Yeah.
work, as my dad used to say, if you can work off the bottom of the tank, you can work off the top of the tank. You just have to get it there in the first place, and that's a way to make sure
Yeah.
that you've always got enough fuel to get out of Dodge because you've always got at least a half a tank. I mean, this is I want to say it's elementary stuff, but most people don't do it. Go down to Barnes and Noble and buy a map of your city.
Yeah.
Just a folding map of your city and stick it in the car and just leave it in your car. And that way, if you get stuck and your GPS isn't working, at least you can figure out an alternate route to get where you're going in order to get out. And then, basics. If you want to throw a basics thing in your car with just basic clothing, I've hunted a lot. I mean, Dave was in the
Yeah.
military. I was never in the military, so I can't speak from a military perspective. But I've been out in the field for 3, 4, 5 days in the snow, in the heat, whatever. A change of socks is a huge thing.
Hmm.
Clean
Absolutely.
socks, clean underwear, different shirt, whatever. I mean, just basic stuff like that can make you feel like a human being when you otherwise maybe you don't. So you don't necessarily have to have your whole wardrobe, but if you got some basics like that, that's super helpful as well. And what else should people do you think, just have? Oh, I will say one thing. I just saw an alert the other day, Dave. Didn't I see an alert in LA where the water's not good in some areas? Where they have to boil it
So,
or they can't drink it or whatever?
well, yeah, there was an emergency alert because obviously a lot of the water sources are being used for firefighting purposes, for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And that's also, having, enough water and food on hand, at least for 72 to 96 hours minimum. And if that from a financial standpoint, stockpile canned food, but always start small. There's a lot of organizations out there that make food kits for disaster, type stuff. I mean, even
Sure.
Costco sells that stuff now. Um, those are things where, you can, pick up that kind of stuff. And like I said, just be educated. I think one of the biggest things is understanding the threats, risks, and hazards in your area, and then plan accordingly, and prepare accordingly, to those threats, risks, and hazards. Because obviously things like you brought up Florida, they have hurricanes all the time. Well,
Yeah.
wildfires isn't really a thing in Florida. That tends to be more hurricane country.
Yeah.
Or, and then on the East Coast right now, they're dealing with heavy snowstorms and all kinds of things, which have the same type of preparedness mindset, which is you still need food, you still need water, you still need comms. But like I said, even as prepared as I feel, on any number of occasions, I still, when a situation like what's occurring here in Los Angeles happens, that makes me reflect upon my own plans.
Yeah.
Like, okay,
Yeah.
you know, you know, are my plans solid? And even if they're general in nature, are my plans feasible? Right? And it makes me really kind of evaluate my whole system of things.
You made a great point, which is chip away at it a little bit at a
Yeah.
time, kind of get this, get that. One thing I would suggest is what my grandparents used to do because they were depression era people. They lived through the
Hmm.
depression, lived through World War II, born, many of them, most all of them, I think, before World War One, right around 1900. And my grandpa Bob used to talk about the FIFO system, first in, first out. And so they always kept the pantry full and everything that was in the pantry would move forward. And my grandmother would stick stuff behind the pantry and move everything
Hmm.
forward, almost as if she worked at a grocery store. Because the first thing in was the first thing out. And that way the pantry was always full. Their emergency preparedness where food was concerned was simply keeping the fridge stocked up and keeping the cabinets stocked up. And then they both had pantries. My grandmother had a walk-in pantry, which was kind of
Yeah.
amazing. I
Yeah.
haven't seen one of those in a long time. But she kept them full. So if you just, again, working off the top of the tank, not the bottom, if you just think about it that way, working off the top of the fuel tank in the truck, working off the top of the food tank, whatever you want to call that, pantry, cupboard, whatever, if you can, first in, first out, and then you've got food for 3 days. It doesn't necessarily have to be separate food. It just has to be, you got to have enough food that you normally consume for 3 to 5 to 6 days and keep it going rather than wait until you've eaten everything and then go to the store and get the barely what you need to get by this week and barely what you need to get by the 3 days. And this is my wife's way of living. I'm not picking on her. It's just true. She will work on, and you know her, you know this. She will put food in the house that lasts for the next 3 days and plan to go to the supermarket in 3 days. And then she'll do it again. She'll do it again and she'll do it again.
Hmm.
COVID hit.
Hmm.
And I've been telling her for years, no, that doesn't make sense. Let's fill up the house. It's not, we have the money. Okay. That's all right. So we go to the store right after COVID and it's a ghost town. There's nothing in the cabinets. There's nothing on the shelves. There's nothing. And we're walking through the store and she's just repeatedly saying to me over and over again, I didn't believe it. I mean, you told me this for years, but I didn't believe it. I just didn't believe it. And she must have said that for 15 minutes walking through the store. I didn't believe it. Because now all of a sudden she's walking through a store where she's used to in the United States, the stores are always full, and then they're not.
Yep.
Buy a little Sawyer water filter or some sort of little water filter that you can connect to your faucet. And that'll help filter your water. Then you don't necessarily have to boil it.
Yeah.
Because if you boil it because it's filthy, it still tastes like crap when you go to use it. Okay, if you filter it. You can filter it and boil it if you want, but the point is that, they're not expensive. You can get them on Amazon or you get them on, if you don't like Amazon, you can get them someplace else. They're not expensive. And then just put it aside and say, okay, I'll use that if I ever have to. You don't have to buy a big fancy filter in your house or whatever. Buy a little one and it'll go with you where you go, right? This is basic stuff and we just don't do it. And that's the problem. And then what'll happen is this fire will go by. And those folks are going to spend the next 2 to 3 years fighting with Los Angeles, trying to rebuild a house, maybe.
Yeah.
And we'll forget about it. And we'll all go back to work, those of us who didn't burn down. And we won't be prepared the next time. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation. Anything else you would advise people to do? I mean, we've kind of rambled around here a lot. I get it.
No, I mean, I think we've covered the gamut. Again, I'm, my heart goes out to all those people that just lost everything, and hope that their recovery is speedy, and hope that they get the help and support that they deserve during this time.
Yeah.
And hopefully, our firefighters and law enforcement, National Guard, et cetera, are able to, keep people safe, and also, get the remainder of these fires out, quick, fast, and in a hurry,
Boy, I hope so.
so we can start on the actual recovery, and get people at least somewhat made whole again.
Okay, so before we wrap up, let's talk about our individual plans. You mentioned that you have a plan in your head. What's in it?
Well, I mean, in my sphere, I have go bags, I have, fireproof safe with documents, and I have stuff stored in the cloud, and I already have some measure of preparedness, but more recently I've started to look around, like, or look around the house, like, okay, is there anything what are the gaps, and I realize, like, some of my stuff's kind of spread out around the house, which takes time. So what I've started to do is I'm starting to co-locate things and basically stage stuff in one place. That way, we can, take the dog, throw him in the SUV, take everything we need to have, clothes, etc. Whatever's there, throw it in there. It's all in one place. Take computers and whatever other things we may need, and roll out. I mean, our loadout should take no more than 15-20 minutes, to get everything loaded up in both cars and out the door. So,
You're more organized than me. I'm just going to confess.
but I mean, but a lot of this stuff has really kind of forced me to kind of, again, go back and analyze. No, like you said, no plan ever survives first contact, right?
No, no.
So I think really taking a hard look at my own preparedness in relation to some of the things that are currently happening. I realize, like, okay, there are some broken parts to my plan. So how do I address those? And that's really what I'm kind of looking at. Making sure, like, for instance, the simulator we use for some of our training,
Yeah.
that's not cheap to replace. So that's something that, you
Talent for
know,
understatement there.
yeah, so that's something
Yeah.
that's also staged with all of that other equipment or all of the other stuff that I would
Yeah.
take, because that's an important piece of the business. That's an important piece, for business operations. So that's something that I would want to make sure that I still had, because that's one of the essential functions of my business.
Well, and you
Um,
bring up a great point, and that is we think about preparedness. How are we going to get out of town? But if you own a business and there's a fire like that, how do you stay in business after the fire? Do you have a plan to do that? As you know, a lot of practical defense systems is online classes. We've got,
mhm,
I don't know, 28,000 students throughout the state who take classes with us, and
mhm,
fires tend to be regional or local. They don't.
yeah,
It's not the whole state that's on fire.
yeah,
But if we lost our home or we can't get to the office, how do I run the business? Well, to that end, we have Starlink Roam. That's going to go in the truck. I've got my laptop. That's going to go in the truck. Our phone system is a virtual phone system. Our
mhm,
email is just email. I mean, let's just call it what it is. The learning management system is a vendor, and of course, they have servers all over the world. The
yeah,
management system for courses is a vendor. They have servers all over the world. So we've positioned it in such a way that as long as I have internet access,
mhm,
I can run our business wherever we are. And not everybody can do that. I get it. But I mean, it's important to think about, okay, if my business burns down, do I have my tool? If I'm an electrician, my business burns down, are all my tools at the shop, or are my tools available to me that I can get them on the truck? Do I have them at home as well as at the shop? Do I have duplicate tools? Do I have the things I need to be able to go back to work? Whatever that may be. And I think those are really important things too. Like you talking about grabbing the simulator, which you've never seen this thing if you're watching this, but I mean it basically goes in this enormous Pelican case, and then he can set it up wherever he goes. It's like one of the few people on the planet that has a mobile law enforcement interactive simulator, and that's Dave. There he is, and he uses that at our training place. He uses it for the sheriff's department and police departments all over the place and like that. But if he loses that, it's not out of business, but that's a big dent in your business, right?
Well, the other thing I would say is, I know we were talking about like personal preparedness, right?
Yeah.
Like your home. I think in my own personal opinion, I think business emergency planning is a little bit more complex,
Yeah.
in a lot of different ways. Mostly, but my advice to a lot of folks is defining what the essential functions of your business are,
Mm-hmm.
and then identifying those essential functions and how they're executed, and then applying different types of disruptions to your business. So what does that look like, right?
Yeah.
And if you have three essential functions and one of them gets disrupted, well, does that really disrupt the whole business or just that one function, right? So
Right.
I think business emergency planning is a lot more complex, and we could probably do a whole nother hour
Probably
or
do
more
5. Right.
on
This is crazy.
because there's a lot of other considerations in a business, whether you're brick and mortar or online, or if you are brick and
Or a
mortar, do
combo
you
like we are. We're kind of a
or a
combo of both,
combo?
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
same with us. So
Same
it's
for
kind
you.
of
Yeah.
like
Right.
so it's kind of trying to figure out, like, what systems are going to be interrupted, and I'll give you a perfect example. Um, we have a bunch of training scheduled for next week in Los Angeles, and a majority of it is being rescheduled. Why? Because it's necessary to do that. Too many people are impacted. Our target audience is the county of Los Angeles, a lot of different departments, and a lot of them have been impacted.
Yeah.
So, we do a lot of training for our public safety partners. Most of those are going to probably be, I would say a majority of those are getting rescheduled because the sheriff's department is deploying. Anybody who is behind a desk, or anybody who doesn't, isn't in a patrol function, is probably being reassigned to a patrol function, because that that is the current need. So, when we talk about kind of collateral things, does the business have contingency plans for that? And we do. We do other training. We can take our training and put it online. So, if there is a need for that, great. Some areas of LA County are not impacted, so none of those trainings, are going to be impacted. But I think it's really taking a look, at your essential functions, and then if there is a disruption, how do you navigate that, or what things do you need to have in place in order to make sure that your business isn't impacted, you know?
Well, and you only have to look at, I mean, first of all, most businesses have no plan at all to
Yeah.
survive this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Well, I mean, big businesses do. Most small mom and pop businesses like my wife and I own, or you own, or whatever, don't. They don't give it
Yeah.
much thought. They don't spend much effort on time on it. And then they go belly up over it. And now what? But I think at the same time, maybe if I were to take away from this conversation, the simple things would be, it can happen to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It can happen no matter where you live, whether you live in the country, you live in the burbs, or whatever. I mean, this has proven that.
Yeah.
It can happen because it's natural. It
Yeah.
can happen because of terrible policies politically. It can happen because the words I wanted to use aren't the most polite. Individual is running around starting fires.
Yes.
You can ask me later what I think ought to happen to that guy, but I don't think he should be breathing at some point or other. That's my opinion about that individual, or individuals, whoever they are.
Mm-hmm.
It can happen for lots of reasons. I think the reasons are, we can talk about how to prevent it later, but regardless, there's always going to be some idiot politician who makes bad choices. There's always going to be
Yeah.
some government department that is underfunded or can't do it or whatever. There's always going to be, right? I mean, we can
Yep.
always point fingers later, but I think if we acknowledge that and we admit it can happen to us, that's the number one thing right there.
Yeah.
Because so many folks fail to do anything about it because they think it can't happen to them, but it does. It can.
Agreed.
And then at that point, just do the basics. I mean, just start with the basics, right? Make sure you got some extra water. Make sure you got some extra food. Try to work off the top of the tank rather than the bottom, as I said, gas tank, food tank, whatever. And put together a at least a mental picture of where am I going to go if something happens, and then get past the idea that it can happen to you. I think people stay too long in these things because they're still convinced that it can't happen to them. Or their entire life is their house, which I think that's the other thing. Look, if you get out and your house burns down, that is still a good result because you got out and you're still around. It's a terrible thing, but worse is to be the burnt, charred remains that firefighters find later because you didn't get out.
Agreed.
So if the choice is get out and lose your home and lose everything and rebuild, or don't get out is a better choice. That's still a good result. It's not the perfect result, but it's a good result. I think if I take anything away from this conversation, it's that. I mean, you don't have to go over the top about being a prepper, but some preparation is, if you would like to get through these things, is certainly, I would say, mandatory. You don't want to be flying by the seat of your pants. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think it's just beneficial, in a lot of ways. There's definitely a benefit to ensuring continuity, for lack of a better term. I think making sure, and again, just like you said, we don't have to make things complex, but rather be practical. And everybody's level of preparedness is going to vary from household to household and from business to business because there are going to be differences, right? So, I think everybody needs to take a hard look at their own situation, and make, those determinations about, what's beneficial for them. Because what's beneficial for you might not work for your neighbor, right? So, I think, again, the people that have lost homes and the people that have, been impacted by this fire. And again, I know people personally, I know people who've lost homes, over this. And, it's an absolute tragedy. And, none of what we're sharing today is directed at any of the folks that are impacted by this, because again, I know people who were impacted who had a plan, right? So, whether you have a plan or not, you can be impacted, but, having a plan and having certain things in place can help you weather that situation a little bit better in terms of, outcomes in most cases. And like you said, if you got out of there and you're alive, you're ahead of the game.
Yeah, because some people didn't.
Structures can be rebuilt.
Right.
You may have, unfortunately, there are people that have lost, family heirlooms and things that can't ever be replaced. And I really do feel for, a lot of those folks. So, hopefully people who have not been impacted by these fires, are really taking a hard look at their own situation, and applying some deference to, hey, what if the bad thing happens? What are we going to do? And hopefully this is certainly generating some of those conversations. And hopefully the people that were impacted, like I said before, get the support services and everything they need, to rebuild and, hopefully, get back to some semblance of what they would perceive to be normal.
And so there you are. There's our rambling conversation. Yeah, we rambled a lot. I apologize. We did ramble a lot. We went really, really long. We didn't get, it was not an organized conversation at all. If you're expecting an organized conversation, I'm not sure why you're watching my show anyway, because oftentimes it's not. But hopefully you got something out of it. And if you have other suggestions, please put them in the description for anybody else who might want to look, because I think these are ways we can help each other be more prepared for these terrible kinds of things that happen. In California, obviously earthquakes and fires, but in other parts of the country, it's storms and hurricanes and like that. So it depends on where you are, what you're being prepared for. But I think it's really a good thing to at least be prepared to a degree. So there you are. I'm repeating myself. Thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Please check us out on Rumble and X if you're watching on YouTube, because YouTube has a tendency to ban or shadow ban videos where Rumble does not. Rumble is my primary home now. I'm still producing things and putting them on YouTube, but primarily I'm promoting Rumble. So check us out over there. There's a link in the description. If you want to know my political opinion about stuff, you can find a link to that in the description as well. And you'll find that on X, to some degree on Facebook. But I get pretty mouthy on X. So if you like that kind of stuff, then head on over there. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful week. And wherever you go, whatever you do, stay safe.